This is the Michael Brighton Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Money Series, and I am joined with Brenda Christensen, who is the CEO of Stellar Public Relations and a world leader in the PR public relations field. So we're going to discuss business, we're going to discuss money and building companies. So Brenda, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to share with your audience.
So I'm curious about how you make decisions around money, and did they shift over time from when you started in business to today?
Yes, it's pretty interesting because when I started in the business world, it was very difficult for women to even get a credit card. It was very tough. A lot of women I knew would try to start with a gas credit card, a petrol station credit card, because that was easiest to acquire. And then you'd have to build your assets off of that, which seems almost comical today, right? But it created a mindset with women who were pioneering in the business field to be very cautious with their assets because it was very difficult to get loans, business loans, personal credit. So I've always been very mindful of my spending, even with the temptations. I was started my career in Los Angeles, and there are a lot of temptations in Los Angeles, a lot of fun things to do and places to shop. But and I learned a lot of it. I think it's a familial thing too. It comes from your family. My father is Danish American and extremely thrifty. And my grandfather didn't tell me much in English. He spoke mostly Danish. But the one thing he did tell me was always count your money twice. So I think it's a thread that runs through families, actually. I was also advised by my father, because I was one of the first females to enter the workforce, to always keep my own personal banking account, personal savings account, even if I married, to keep it separate. Because my father had seen so many women ruined by divorce. Their financials were just completely devastated. So those are all things of my upbringing and background.
Do you find that that is a common thing, that it breeds this almost safety mindset around whether it's money or finances? And do you have any advice for anyone that is possibly in that situation?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and I'm a big proponent of Warren Buffett, and I've been quoted in Yahoo Business and on other leading tier one financial publications on how I created and grew my wealth. And I never let those basic principles of being budget minded leave my purview. For instance, I refuse to go to Starbucks. I won't go to Starbucks. It's just coffee. Um, I cut my own hair at home, believe it or not. I never liked to go to a salon anyway, but I'm still that way because those were the foundations that helped me create and build wealth. I also took calculated risks with my career. Um, I worked for a very large PC manufacturer when during the boom times, and I got Employee of the Month. I was doing quite well, and I quit to go start at a very small software company, and on a lateral um, pay schedule. But I knew that the future was probably software at the time. And sure enough, they made me a board of directors. And after 7 years, we grew the company for 100,000 to 100 million, and I cashed out. So I think it's important to remain flexible and open-minded about opportunities. And it's always a good idea to cast around to your friends and family their thoughts as well. They have varied experience and they have more experience in some cases. So I always weighed that very carefully too. A lot of my friends thought I was insane to leave a major corporation that was doing really well. But I think when you're in your 20s, you can afford to take those kind of risks, and it's important to do so.
I know that you're a big proponent of being bold as well. This idea of taking risks and not taking no for an answer, that sort of thing, not giving up. How do you think about that? How do you help people do that? How do you make those sorts of decisions?
Um, the way I look at it is life is a series of risks. There's risks all around you anyway, so you might as well choose the risks you want to take before they happen to you. So, for instance, a good example of this is being in the right place at the right time. I'm a big proponent of putting yourself out there, and it's much easier to do now with social media. But be inquisitive, be bold, ask questions, and I noticed that people will always be responsive to that. And it's a trait that I've seen with other people in these circles. Like a good friend of mine is Steve Wozniak. He's the same way. He's not afraid to ask questions. He's very inquisitive. So I tend to see that this is a mindset of people who are very successful in their career and also with their money management. They ask those hard questions. They're not afraid to ask questions, and they're bold in their approach.
How would you say that that weighs up against the idea of there are people out there that are delusional as well, Brenda, where they think themselves deeper and deeper into this hole, and there simply isn't a ladder big enough to get out of said hole. So what's the balancing act there? What is the difference between those two people?
What's the difference is that I was encouraged in certain areas and discouraged in other areas. And so the way I like to look at it is I'm performing on the world stage, right? So I would always pay attention to those areas that were being rewarded and consistently over time, where the doors were opening, where I was receiving positive feedback. And it's quite difficult because a lot of people are very determined in what they want to do. They have a dream. But if those doors are being closed all the time, if you take that road, then that's a signal to you that you're on the wrong path. So it's important to kind of be aware, situationally aware, and see where you're getting the positive feedback, see where you're getting the kudos, the reinforcement. And when I followed these signals and created or made a pivot into these different paths, that's where I was greatly rewarded 10 times, tenfold.
It's interesting, isn't it, how there's a person out there that would be very, I guess, anxious around taking risks. And then you're saying that life is a series of risks because there's a risk with everything. And then you link that to assets and finances and money, and there's a risk to everything. Most things are either
Yes.
consumables or they're not. And sometimes you've got to weigh that up in terms of where you put your money, like you mentioned, you cut your own hair, that sort of thing. It seems like it's a lifestyle that's built around decision making and balancing, whether it's ROI or cost versus investment or benefits versus negatives, that sort of thing. It's a very much a decision based lifestyle. Like it's built around the same principles.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I'd have to say it's 50-50 hard work and the other is chance and pure luck. Um, I found that when I desire to help others and I put a lot of work into it, the rewards are tenfold, not just monetarily, but given access to environments and parties and situations that most would not have access to, and then boldly stepping into those as well. Because I worked so diligently um, building an EP500 company, it afforded me opportunity that never would have been presented to me. I was invited to parties where I met people like Bill Gates and Michael Bell, and um, and I I would step up and introduce myself as well, because I understood the value of opportunity and putting myself in places where there was a higher likelihood of connecting with people who were influential.
You must be pretty good at telling what an opportunity looks like. So whether it be, Gates or others, and you always seem to be very attuned to situations where you can, I guess, wiggle into the situation to try and get something out of it, whether that's purely positive, purely emotional, purely intrinsic, or even, external things as well. We can't be forgetful of those. How do you look for opportunities? How do you know when something is an opportunity and not just a slammed door in disguise?
That is the key, right? Um, Most of the people that I've worked with that are billionaires, they have a natural instinct for this. And it's kind of like an X factor. I'll give you an example. I interviewed for this software company, and I saw something they had that no one else had, right? Because I'm just immensely curious about the world. So I'm constantly reading, constantly studying others, their behavior. I'm a huge sponge. And I thought this is going to be a huge, huge opportunity because I had never seen anything like this product before. And I had a personal need for it. So I thought if I have a need for it and I'm in the business world, I can't imagine everyone in the world would. And sure enough, Bill Clinton at the time used our software program to fundraise, and he told us that if he hadn't used it, he would have never become president. Incredible stories like that. And the same co-founder of the same company invited me to launch a new company of his, a startup. And one of the investors was Mark Cuban. And I was in his office. And he says, "Hey, I've got Mark on the phone. You want to talk to him?" I said, "Absolutely." So, I've been interviewed about working with these individuals, and there's a common thread that runs through all of them. They're not afraid to take risks. They're not afraid to ask questions. They have a natural gut instinct on which way to turn, which path to take. They're highly attuned and aware individuals who are constantly reading their environment and making assessments in microseconds about situations and opportunities. So, but this can be honed over time as well. I think the best way to learn is to, model yourself after people you admire that have also been successful. That's pretty key.
It must be fascinating to learn about the billionaires of the world, and it's making me think, is there anything that you're wanting to include in that list? If we're thinking the mindset of somebody that has accrued that much wealth, is there anything else that stands out as to something that the way that they think, the way they make decisions, or is it just a case of they're able to stay fairly grounded while they're doing what they do?
Yeah, the best example of that is I had the great honor of working for the Taubman Company, and many people don't know who that is, but Mr. Alfred A. Taubman at the time was the most wealthy individual in the world when I worked for him. And he drove a station wagon. He was very modest. He started with $1,000 investment, and he actually pioneered the multi-level enclosed mall concept. He had 20 malls nationwide. He owned Sotheby's in New York, and he owned the Rockefeller building, but he didn't tell anyone, didn't want anyone to know. He owned Beverly Center, which is the flagship shopping center in Beverly Hills, California. So when I worked with him, I saw modesty, but yet I saw someone who was very driven and very bold in their business decisions. One of the people that used to come to the office who mentored him was Donald Trump. And the interesting thing about these wealthy individuals is they all have very different personalities. Um, Whereas Mr. Taubman was very modest. Donald Trump was the opposite of that. He was very bombastic, kind of like he was considered the P.T. Barnum of commercial real estate. And I got to work with him and know him a bit. He was considered a bit of a loose cannon. He wasn't involved in all the deals that Mr. Taubman was doing, particularly Irvine Ranch, which is the majority real estate of Orange County. So as we see how things have evolved, this has come to be a disservice to Mr. Trump in his later years, this type of personality. So yeah, it's pretty fascinating to see how things evolve within those circles.
It definitely is. And it's actually making me wonder, how do people plan so far ahead? Like you look at the Warren Buffetts of the world, and they often bring up things like economies are in decade cycles, and everyone's like, oh, every 10 years there's this, and
Mm-hmm.
every 10 years there's that. And I'm thinking, okay, but how do you, I guess the way of planning so far in advance is understanding that that's how it works. But how do you sit there and plan that far ahead and able to take actions on it, which just baffles some people?
Yeah, I'm lucky in that I went to a wonderful university. I have a journalism degree from a top U.S. university, top 10 in the world. And as part of a required curriculum, we had to take economics. We had to take macro and microeconomics, and you learn these basic principles in those courses, how economies are on cycles, and how to look for triggers like durable goods is a leading indicator of how an economy is doing, right? Not inflation, because they presume you're gonna be reporting on trends. So you can learn this online. You can actually utilize AI, you know, as a guide for this as well. One of the most interesting facts I learned, which I've never said publicly, but I had a minor in clothing and textiles. I wanted to become a fashion writer, and I did write some articles for Glamour magazine and others. We took fashion history, and all through history, garments were a result of warfare or battle or trends. And it's been proven throughout time that just prior to an economic downturn, lapels and ties and shoes will narrow. And just prior to an economic upturn, lapels and ties and shoes will widen, get bigger. And it's been without fail for centuries, which is pretty interesting. Now, I don't know if Warren Buffett knows this, but it's probably one of the most accurate leading indicators of how the world economy is going to go, which is fascinating to me because no one would think it would be found in the fashion world, right?
Yeah, that's making me look down at my shoes every day now, just thinking,
If they're
maybe.
pointed toe, yeah, if they're like women's heels, if the toes are pointy or if they're square or rounded, will determine the coming economy. Crazy stuff. But yeah, I think that it's a combination of factors, right? It's personality, it's boldness, it's having some basic acumen about how economies work and geographically and geopolitics. And these are all things which are, accessible to everyone now with the internet and especially with AI.
What are some of the things that you utilize in your own life when it comes to financial elements? So it could be whether it's savings, whether it's investments, that sort of thing. What do you do practically to benefit from whether it's the income that you bring in from businesses and companies to the interest that you build from savings or investments? What do you do with your money side of things?
Well, it's really interesting because I saw a lot of opportunity in California, so I moved there because it was a very dynamic, extremely capitalist, new business, favorable for small business, favorable for startups, and that's shifted now. That's no longer the case. So, and also, you'll see very wealthy individuals are leaving California. They're going to places like Nevada, right? Arizona, Washington, Idaho, and Florida because of the taxation, right? Really eats at your income. So we moved from California to Florida 7 years ago, and we couldn't be happier. It's very similar to the way California was in the 90s. It's very much pro-business, pro-startup. The tax burden is much smaller. So these are really interesting considerations people don't think about. A lot of people think about world politics in the national stage, but your local politicians, because I used to be a political newspaper reporter, have a huge impact on your wallet, where you reside, what laws you're under, taxation codes, that type of thing. We've also seen California become stricter about freelance, right? And so it's not very business friendly, I would say. So those are things to look out for.
Do you find that these can hold people back quite severely, I guess you could say? Like, it's interesting how you think about money, opportunities, and then it's like, okay, you go outside of that, like you pass people on the street and they think so differently about it. They think almost
Yeah.
the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, just moving from California to Florida, we saw a 20% income increase just by relocating, doing nothing else than moving where we exist, which is incredible. I mean, I can't think of any other investment that would give you that type of return, right? So, like I said, I think there's a difference between people who are forward looking and situationally aware and those who aren't. And it's good to step outside of yourself and see a bigger picture, right? Because you could make the best effort as an individual, putting yourself out there, but place and time, situational elements are also very important to have a huge impact on individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because then you hear things like you're the average of the people that you spend the most time with, and I wonder if there'd be a lot more millionaires if we spent more time with billionaires, and that kind of just the way that you think, the way that you make decisions, the way you, I guess, balance things or work out what the best thing is to do. It becomes a very different decision when you're learning from better, in air quotes, people all the time, every day, just because you spend so much time with them.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think it rubs off for sure. But what's great about, social media and AI is with AI, you have a billionaire in your pocket, right? It's the knowledge base of all the best practices, best advice, that you have at your fingertips. In fact, we're going to see a lot more startups that are generated by AI or assistance through AI. We didn't have AI, right? When I built the EP500 company and it was, we were Entrepreneur of the Year nationally in the United States. We were number one, right? And it was all based on, situational and our own experience and knowledge and the knowledge of others. But now you have all of this at your fingertips. It's wonderful.
It is wonderful. The amount of information that's out there is fascinating, to say the least, Brenda.
It is.
But where do we go for, I guess, the higher level information? Because we can Google it and, well, the SEO of certain topics might not necessarily bring in the best answer to the question that you're
Yeah.
asking. So where do you go for the information that you need?
I'm lucky in that I was around these individuals, right? In the early part of my career, I learned from the best of the best. I think in information and knowledge sharing is so important. That's why shows like yours are extremely important, and that they provide a resource for people to emulate others' success. Warren Buffett is very, very vocal about his lifestyle and his decision making and how he goes about his decision making. I think he's someone to follow, right? Um, so I hope that answers your question. I think so much of it though is instinct and honing that instinct over time as well, learning from mistakes. Being positive is such an important asset of building wealth. Um, so many people who have great wealth have filed for bankruptcy. They have they have an opportunistic mindset, and that's important to develop.
You ever find that it doesn't always go hand in hand, this whole wealth with mindset? You mentioned bankruptcy, and do you ever get the feeling that they just, I don't know, whether they gave out or they just couldn't keep doing it anymore? Sometimes it is just the time that takes its toll, I suppose you could say. Or would you say that there was so many other
It's
things going
interesting.
on?
It becomes a habit, right? So the saying goes, little start with little things, they become bigger things, and they become habit, and habits become lifestyles, right? So it's important to pay attention to the details of your everyday life. And once you do that and you follow those paths that are bringing reward and you repeat those same activities, you're pretty much set, right? And it becomes habit. And then the wealth creates the wealth, right? So ideally, and look at someone like Mark Cuban. This is someone who goes on Shark Tank and he goes into detail about how they presented, right? You didn't present this well, you didn't do this well, because it's in the details. And those details become second nature over time. So it really doesn't feel like an effort or a struggle. There are, huge extenuating circumstances. There's downturns in the economy, right? Like 2008. They tend to come every 15 years or so. But if you have those right practices in place, you're fairly insulated from that, and that's the goal.
That's making me, I guess, build an assumption then that there are no real shortcuts. Like you can learn so much, you can practice so much, but it's the repetition that will get you there. It's the habits, it's the lifestyle that you lead. And sometimes there is no real shortcut. So what's your take on stuff like that?
It's interesting because my father went to West Point, and how they train, that's the ultimate, right, soldier. And how they train them is in the details. Like he had to make his bed a certain way every morning, right? He had to polish his belt, polish his shoes. His uniform had to be um, a certain way to pass inspection, right? And taking care of these details, and it's been proven one of the things that successful people do. This is a really another outlier, like the fashion thing, is every day make your bed. And what's really interesting is what it does. And for me, it's almost a ritual. Of course, as soon as I wake up in the morning, I make my bed because it sets in place details, right? And it's almost like a ritual for me, a mantra. I'm making my bed. I'm making my bed. I'm preparing myself for entering the world, getting on the world stage. So this is the difference between highly successful people and people who are not so successful. Um, and that's really something interesting, and it must be based in psychology, or I don't think West Point would do it because West Point cannot fail. And my father went on, he became a colonel in the Air Force, and he went on to work for the space program for NASA. He's one of the people, the geniuses that put humans on the moon. And that was that was a reason why we're successful in doing so, is because there are hundreds of people like him who have been trained to be fastidious with the details. And that led to the success, the ultimate success of the program.
Well, Brenda, this has been truly fascinating. Those that are listening, I'm sure you're making loads of notes. I know I am. And I wonder if people wanted to find out more about you, where can they go to enter your world? So it could be a website, it could be social media. How can people find out about you?
Sure. I think the best place, LinkedIn is a great resource for everyone in career and wealth building. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's my first and last name, linkedin.com/NIN, and then my first and last name, Brenda Christensen.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Brenda, I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks very much.
Thank you.